Okay, folks. So on today's podcast, we have Mariia Alekseevskaia. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. So this is going to be a very interesting episode. Maria's come to us, from Russia originally, but today from Ottawa. So she made quite the trek to be here. And she's written pretty much, it's fully done. It's just in the process of being examined, a paper on the Canadian Reformed churches, and specifically with a focus on the educational aspect of our churches.
Mm.
So it's very long, it's very thorough, and we're very fascinated to talk to her about it.
Yep.
So first off, just welcome to the program, Mariia.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And it's actually an honor not only to be part of your program, and I'm a follower of your podcast.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I really enjoyed. And I feel actually honored to have this chance to come back to the community which I have studied and to bring the fundings which I have in my paper, in my thesis. Maybe some of people of the community wouldn't agree with them. Maybe some would agree with them. I consulted with several members of the community on several sections to make sure that it's as truthful as possible.
Yeah.
But the chance to share what I explored and these general findings, I think it's actually great to bring it back, and especially since the community has contributed very generously, enormously, and I believe very honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is one of the most important things for a person who is an outside of this community. I'm not a member of any of the Reformed churches. I'm coming from another traditional Christian church, from Eastern Orthodox Church.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And I think it helped me to build dialogue with the members of the community. So they knew that I'm coming also from a Christian background. And it helped to build the dialogue because there wasn't a fear that I'm coming with the hypothesis or predisposition that I'm questioning the existence of the community, or existence of the institutions such as religious schools. I was coming with a very different question to analyze what the schools which have existed for so many decades, from the 1950s in Canada and from the 1970s from Ontario in particular. And they stayed all these decades.
Yeah, we're still there, still going.
So my question was to examine what they bring to the graduates of the schools.
Graduates, yeah.
Graduates, what challenges the graduates have after they finish the schools, after they graduate.
Yeah.
And what's good about the schools as well. So I'm coming with this question. I think it helped the community to be interested also in the findings and the research itself, because they saw the benefit for the community itself to see the findings themselves.
Very much.
Yeah, and to select maybe those who they want to address some challenges, others we might disregard as well. But they saw the value. And I would say that practically many people who were approached, they said yes to participate in the research. Those who said no, I never heard anything negative, that this research is useless or what the point of that. So people were polite, and the engagement rate was very, very high from the community. There was a real snowball. People were contacted their friends or their relatives telling about this research. And it was interesting that I tried to protect the anonymity. All the participants were supposed to be anonymous, but when I showed up for the interview and the person told me, "Oh, my sister called me yesterday. She also participated in your interview just 2 days ago." So it was very fun. I'm also very happy to share the findings. What another aspect of the research, and I think it's very unique in its sense and valuable. Not only I'm an outsider, and I believe that it's one of the first studies about Canadian Reformed community being done by the outsider.
Yes.
So Canadian Reformed Church and their institutions usually studied from inside.
Yeah.
Of course, there are a lot of benefits from that, because you know exactly everything about your community. Because you study with them, you go to kindergarten, you go to school, you go to elementary school, to secondary school, that even to go maybe through Reformed Covenant Canadian Reformed Teachers College.
Sure. Yeah.
And then maybe you join a business in your community, and then very, very likely you'll get married to a person from your church or from the same community, even from another province, still the same community, and it's going on and going. So it's good, you think you know everything. And there are so many things which I didn't know when I decided to study this community. There's so many gaps. And those gaps are not covered in the literature. One of the reasons is because the community was mainly studied from the point of view of historical revisions or theological studies. like historical about their schools or theological about like what is the basis of this community. But there wasn't many studies about like sociological aspects. When you look through sociological lens at the institutions and ask those kind of qualitative study questions, what are the benefits, what are the challenges?
Yeah.
And I think it's actually valuable from this point of view, being an outsider who is a little bit inside in the sense of being a Christian, but an outsider because I didn't know how the institutions are built. So I all studied from scratch, comparing Canadian Reformed Church to other Reformed Church, including to Christian Reformed Church.
Right.
And I think it was incredibly beneficial just to kind of trying to predict what can be the future of the institutions of Canadian Reformed Church, and also to see what is the difference in the mentality between those people who came at the same time to the country as post-war Dutch immigrants. Mr. Holmskirk mentioned in your interview, they were very adventurous. There were people who decided to
entrepreneurial.
Entrepreneurial, and this is a great point. But they were all entrepreneurial, all Dutch people who came here, not only Canadian Reformed who built the church here. So what is this very special about Canadian Reformed people who have preserved the identity? Why others couldn't preserve it to this extent that they could have their own institutions for so many decades? And my study at least shows that they have succeeded, broadly speaking. It didn't prevent this third, fourth generation of immigrants to integrate in the society. It didn't prevent the first and the second as well. Even though the community is self-isolated to some degree, and they're still self-isolated to some degree, and there are strict policies in terms of enrolling the students in the school system and hiring the teachers. You need to be a member of Canadian Reformed Church or the sister churches. But still, you see that they're having a dialogue with outside communities, and there is more and more outward looking rather than only inward looking. So what is very special about these particular Dutch people?
What happened?
What happened to them? I was very interested, and I decided to study this particular Dutch group, Canadian Reformed, because I found that this is quite a unique case of long-standing immigrant community, which have succeeded to integrate not like only economically, but also socially, culturally, and politically. We see that ARPA, which represents several reform people across different churches, but still we know that Canadian Reformed Church and United Reformed Church, they're one of the biggest support for this association. And the more I studied this not only school is it's institutes of the community, so you cannot just divide the church and theology from the school system. So you need all the time combined together, especially since the community sees the triangle, how the children being taught by the church, by parents, and by school. So it's a very intertwined sides. It's very hard to divide and decide what is the impact of the school on those children who have gone through all elementary and high school, and what is the influence of their parents, about the influence of the church. But there is something special. So I think that we'll talk about this, what is special about this Canadian Reformed community. And and Frederica Osterhoff, she told that this is a very unique entity in Canadian mosaic. And I strongly believe that even though there are only 10,000 people across Canada of Canadian Reformed, there is something special about this group and this case study. I think I'm speaking like I'm Canadian Reformed.
You're doing a real good propaganda job for the community. I'll give you that.
I mean, maybe Canadian Reformed Church will get more people because there are some issues with enrolling more people and getting more people in the church. But I hope that after this interview, people would say, what is there? What's special about this community?
We're very excited to dive into that and to talk to you about it. And
we're excited to share your findings. I'm excited to get once the paper's been reviewed to get it out, and then hopefully we can share it. And I'm very interested to read the whole thing because we only read little snippets out of it. So
totally. So basically, I guess to summarize here, your excellent answer there. That was you're looking at the community as a whole. And you're looking at different institutions and the churches and the schools, and what makes this particular group of people special and unique, and how they've been able to keep their community a community distinctive from the rest of Canada, but also still integrate into Canada.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. And I think when they came here, and of course we know that those people who decided to establish the Canadian Reformed Church, they were followers of Klaas Schilder.
Yes.
Mhm.
So, and it affected them to some extent to decide to create the church. So basically because they didn't want to join a Christian Reformed Church, since they didn't agree on certain aspects. And this was one of the reasons why they decided to create a school system, because it wasn't a plan originally. And I was very fascinated by the theory of pillarization. And I think I was torturing everybody I was interviewing, talking about pillarization, because I want like something very cool. People didn't know about this pillarization concept, and they thought it doesn't work. It's not relevant for our community. It's completely different.
Can you explain that for a second?
Yeah, I hadn't heard about it, and then I was reading about it in your paper.
Yeah. So basically, it's something which was how this society in the Netherlands was set up from the 1860s from the late 19th century until the 1960s. So basically, the society was divided across social and religious classes, and again, it's simplistically talking and dividing this society. It will be the Catholics, the Protestant people, socialists, and liberals.
Okay.
And so all the institutions and different political and social organizations were created around these 4 particular groups. And only the elites of these groups, the leaders of these groups, they would communicate between each other and cooperate and collaborate to the extent it's needed to run the country.
Okay.
And it was kind of the idea developed. Of course, the concept emerged much later.
Yeah,
but the idea was developed by Van Prinsterer, and then Kuyper. Abraham Kuyper was a big follower of Van Prinsterer, and for him it was important concept of pluriformity and sovereignty. And he thought that it's would be not correct for the society to put one particular group in a privileged position. So being a Christian, and we know that he was true to Reformed tradition.
Oh, for sure.
But he thought that for the best of the Dutch society, it would be good to cooperate and to learn good things from each other.
Yeah.
Not everybody supported this idea. Not everybody supported the idea of pluriformity of churches. But Kuyper thought, as I understand him, that it's not bad to have several Reformed churches, so everyone would find the right church for themselves. And he developed the concept of common grace, which Klaas Schilder wasn't that agreed on. And he said that, of course, Reformed Christianity, Netherlands Reformed Church, this is the true church. But again, I'm not here in the position of a theologian explaining Kuyper, but this is how I understand that. Even this is the true church, and this is where in Christianity you can get salvation. But other people who not members of our church, they still can have some high morality. They can be very highly ethical people and be good friends and good colleagues, even though they won't get salvation. But they still can be good people.
Sure.
And why not to cooperate with them to achieve some common goals?
Yep.
This is how they cooperated, for example, with the Catholic political party at the time, and they reached the agreement on the 1917 law in Holland, in the Netherlands, so that there would be equal distribution of, there would be public, so secular basically, and the religious schools would get the unequal payment. If Kuyper, even being a prime minister, only was leading his one party and trying to lobby this law, he wouldn't win. But just coming together as all religious groups in the parliament, they could win this law. And it's fascinating that it's still in place. So now, still today, even though we know that Holland is pretty secular, but they have a wide diversity of schools. Religious and philosophical ones as well. And they're covered by the government.
Interesting.
So it's kind of, the
legacy is still
the
there.
legacy of Kuyper.
Yeah, fascinating.
It seems like in Canada we don't really have that, but we do have, organizations obviously like ARPA who we're very intertwined with our government and very interested in working with other people, at that level and stuff. To
some extent, and this is the interesting thing. So at Kuyper time, there weren't many other religious groups in Holland, so they were mainly Christians. So it was easy for him to tell, let's cooperate and build something together and lobby something together. Today, when we talk about Canada or Holland, we talk about very multicultural, multi-religious societies. When you have very different approaches and how you see God and how you understand and how you mentality and behave and so on. So ARPA doesn't cooperate with other non-Christian groups.
Right.
Yeah, so it always with different other Christian communities, but it's not with Muslim communities. And this is what I think distinguishes Canadian Reformed Church from Christian Reformed Church communities. While Christian Reformed Church communities, they actually build dialogue with Muslims. They are not at the level yet that they build cooperation and they lobby something and they go together.
Right.
But they already have built some missionary level initiatives. That is one thing, but there is also grassroots initiatives. For example, here in Guelph and in Ajax. In Ajax, there is United Reformed Church initiative.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, but many of them Christian Reformed, and they meet with Muslim people from the neighborhoods or from the cities, and they try to talk to each other and to learn from each other. It's more like a dialogue about comparing what they think about like theological aspects, and because there are some overlapping as well.
Okay, interesting.
Especially in like the political sphere, I guess, in the social sphere. So
I mean, in religious aspects as well, how they see the world, and actually, if you compare Islam to Calvinism, I'm sure that many readers maybe listeners switch off right now, but there are similarities, like how you see it. So they approach the sovereignty of God and
totality, Christ over all.
And also, if you don't compare like theology, but we compare the social political aspect, what you stand for, what is the priority for you in life. Like it's pro-life, it's family comes first, it's the future of the children, and you know that many Muslim people who come in Canada, they pay for private Muslim schools, and they also want the best for their children. Wanting the best for the children, some of them prefer to choose a public school system, again, just to have something good for them. So we see a relation, like broadly speaking, with the Christian Canadian Reformed community in the sense that what you want the best for your family.
Right.
But I think that Reformed community from Canadian Reformed is not at the stage that actually to build cooperate with Muslim communities or even to build any dialogue and to have just sit around the table and discuss. So it's not there yet.
Okay. So you didn't find any in your research? Has ARPA not coordinated with different Muslim groups and other faith groups when working in Parliament in terms of different bills that affect a wide variety of faith communities? Like I'm thinking of that. I might get the number of the bill wrong. It might be C7. C7 might be the
C7 is
that's the MAID one, the euthanasia.
Yep.
And the other one was the counseling one. I don't know if that's C6 or not. I might be getting the facts wrong. But the one about
7.
Yeah. Well, that's where that's a place of 6. Yes. But there was that bill that potentially criminalized. It was the conversion therapy. There we go.
Yeah.
That one. I thought there was some cooperation there, but maybe I got that wrong.
You could be right. I cannot be told that I'm an expert in all ARPA involvement because ARPA is doing a fantastic job. they release something new every day. So, but you're right that yes, they might cooperate on some regulations when it's possible, but it's not that they actually tell that this is what we need to do on a regular basis. So it's not a regular basis activity.
It's not really a community to community communication so much as like at the high level. When their interests align on a bill, they sit down together.
Yeah, there's definitely no grassroots initiative as far as I'm aware of. That's like we need to speak with Muslims more.
Yeah, we're starting to do that a little bit in mission and stuff like that, but I think it's more in a missional context of like how do we reach out to these people to bring them into our church, and not how do we collaborate with the local mosque to push all
Beirut pizza party or something. Yeah.
But pizza parties can be very efficient, and the mission can happen after.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But this is when I did another research about this dialogue and talked to people from Christian Reform community. So they mentioned you cannot approach people as a project. So of course you have, and you want the idea to bring them to your church, which can be a good idea, but you still need to treat them as human beings who maybe don't want to do it, and maybe they have just to have to do a dialogue and
build relationship first,
and can be beneficial as well. And they see that maybe God leads you to meet this person for your own sake, to learn something from this person. Now, this is, I think, what Kuiper meant about, and I believe that maybe not now, but Canadian Reformed community will come to the step that we need to cooperate. because you know that Canada is becoming more and more secular to some extent, and when you disagree on some regulations, and what can you do if you're a very small community, you need to cooperate with others. And if you want to cooperate, for example, on private religious schools, you can't cooperate with huge Catholic community in Ontario because they get money they get funding from the government.
Yep.
They have their publicly funded schools, so it's very different. And Canadian Reform community, they have private ones. So they need to cooperate with other organizations to have private schools. And I know that League of, I think it's the League of Canadian Reform School Societies, they have some meetings and cooperation and dialogue with representatives of Jewish schools and Muslim schools.
Okay.
Because they want to learn from each other. And, the future of religious schooling in Canada depends on how strong you build your religious schooling community
For sure.
to defend your rights to exist. There was an interesting case recently when the Christian Heritage Party, they supported this new motion to recognize the genocide of the communities in China, Muslim communities in China.
Muslims,
Uyghur Muslims. And they mentioned that they're not all Muslims, but many of them are Muslims. So I think it's a huge step for the community to openly support predominantly Muslim group abroad.
Sure, yeah.
And
seems like a natural evolution to me. Like you say, as the country gets more secular, it's going to make sense that the remaining religious people are going to cooperate and come together.
Yeah. And I think it's good because there is a big topic for ARPA as well, human rights defense, and seeing that a Christian Heritage Party, which is states itself as that they endorse Judeo-Christian heritage of Canada, and the pro-life party, but you see a lot of socio-political similarities with other religious groups, not only Muslims, but many others. And they come to this, understanding, I think, and awareness that it can be a good idea to defend other religious groups because when something happens to Canadian Reformed Church or United Reformed Church, others will also consolidate and help because this is the religious rights.
Yeah. No, it makes sense too. Like from a political sense, like many new immigrants to Canada are socially conservative and share many of the same, not all, but some fundamental religious values that are common to all the Abrahamic faiths. Is that I don't know if you've come across this in your research, but is that more because of the growing predominance of Muslim and say other faiths in Canada with a lot of immigration and stuff, or is it a decline in maybe the valuing of Judeo-Christian values from like that? We were, obviously we were founded on that, but we've as a culture and like in Canada we've moved away from that. Is that collaboration kind of a result, or like maybe we should be more collaborating? Is that more of a result of that shift into a more secular world, or is it just something that we should just have always been doing? Because we haven't really been doing it, I guess.
I think that if you look at Dutch community, you can see from the beginning when they came to the country, even approaching the schools, they were different, and they had different theology behind that. So Heemstra, he has a very interesting study about this Dutch community. So he said that we can divide them into 3 groups: those who decided to join public schools directly, just to assimilate fully. There were those, it was broadly speaking about Dutch people. There were those who were isolationists.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. Like
and those
homeschooler, Right.
No, it's not. I think that Canadian Reform schools, they were to some extent between the second and third groups, between isolationist and transformative approach.
Okay.
Because transformative, it's more, I believe, Christian Reformed Church, which decided to pretty soon like to make the schools interdenominational schools, and so everybody can join them and maybe join the church, but make it more open, and then engage in the society and transform the culture of the society and make the society as Christian as possible, and so on. So this is Kuyperian ideas, to be involved in every sphere of the life. Because it's each sphere of the society has their unique character, unique task, and Christians need to be in every sphere of the society. And looking at the Canadian Reform community broadly, I would say that they weren't isolationist. For example, how they approach the political life of Canada. And still, many Canadian Reformed would say that, it's a politics, there is nothing like good there. It's kind of dirty business. I would just stay away from that.
Right.
I would just live my life. And there were very nice words by Mark Penning, and I brought a quote with me, my ARPA Canada executive director. So he said that we don't always understand how our faith is supposed to shape every part of our lives. We also have to get our hands dirty and apply our faith to politics and many other spheres which we may want to avoid. And this is very Kuiperian vision. And he put this hands dirty in the scopes because ARPA doesn't do anything against the Reformed theology. So they wouldn't go to completely against the theology.
Sure.
But what Canadian Reformed people sometimes don't support, and when you make a compromise.
Yes.
But at which stage you need to make a compromise? If you live in a multicultural society where 25% of people are nones, they're non-religious people, and you're a small community, and the traditional Christians are still not that big part of the society for now, what do? You need to take some steps to reach the final goal. So this, for example, we need a law. They decided they proposed, let's at least to change the regulation on abortion in Canada to limit it until 12 weeks. Of course, this is not the final goal. This is not their goal, but they want to start from this point and then to see how you can move forward. You cannot just put a big goal which not many people support. Yeah. And then to go and reach it. So it's step by step. So many people in the Reform community, they still, some part of them, they don't support this approach. And this was about the schooling system. So let's isolate ourselves. Let's have greenhouses. We have protected. And I think that there is a shift from this second, if we put this in three groups, Dutch people, the Dutch Reform people, there is a shift from the second group into third group in the sense that they see that we need to transform the society. We need to participate in the society and do as much as we can to be involved. And we see how more and more political clubs in the Canadian Reform schools are being created. There are around 14, 15 across the country and 4, 5 in Ontario. It's I tell 4, 5 this for how interviewees counted them because they're not created by ARPA. They're not related to ARPA directly unless they ask ARPA to participate in this to some extent. So there are more grassroots initiatives in the schools. They're growing. Then you have Youth God and Government Conference organized by ARPA. And you see how many young people are there.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. And they're so ambitious. They have so many ideas. They're so bright. And I was fascinated to see that practically equal ratio of boys and girls there. And I think it's really great to see how female population of the community also engaged and they see themselves as being also active part of the society. For those who decide for whom who decide they can become a mom and take this role, and you know that this is one of the crucial one and important and essential one for the women in the view of the community, but they also see themselves as doing something else besides being a mom, being a wife, and besides volunteering, but be very, very engaged in the society. So I see it like that, and because there is this transformation of the community toward this direction. So I think that they can also be more open to cooperation, more open to dialogue, more open to engagement. And this is the dilemma between what kind of political party, for example, or approach is right one. Like philosophically speaking, this is the right one. Yep. When you need to take a compromise, when it's actually you can achieve something.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the community is a little bit divided between these two blocks.
It's kind of two philosophies.
Did you find that? Because I think you mentioned you interviewed 64 people for this paper, so that's pretty neat. And that was quite a wide variety of different people too.
Yes, I did this.
Even people who had left the church as well, so you had kind of a bit of an outsider perspective from their point of view. And then I guess it was teachers, educators, some pastors, perhaps people from ARPA. Maybe just give us an idea of who you talked to and then what kind of general feedback you got from those people.
Thank you for the questions. It's really important because when we go to the fundings, you want to know what is the methodology of the study? What is it based on? Especially since I didn't grow up in this community, so I'm not part of it. I thought that for being an outsider, I could do something else besides talking to the people inside the community. And it was randomly. I didn't know the people. So for many people in the community, you associate some last names with certain families, and then you have some associations and some histories and so on. So I don't have that. For me, everyone is the same. Everyone is equal. Yeah. Sure. Everyone is good to be an interviewee. So how I started, and I think that maybe you might have a question why a Russian person would study a Canadian Reform community.
I was going to circle back to that eventually. Like, okay, maybe just to back up, how did you find us, and what made you so intrigued by our community?
So back in Russia, when I was 15, actually, I read the Max Weber, Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Yep. And I was actually very, very impressed how one religious, one theology can affect and shape the mentality of people and can affect the whole society to some extent. And we see how some society is Protestant in Europe developed, like what their history, what their political approaches, then predominantly Catholic ones. So the cultures are very different. The mentality is different. And it affects economics, but not only economics. It affects a lot of other spheres of life as well. And I was intrigued by the figure of Jean Calvin as a historical figure. And I was incredibly curious to know who his followers are. Are they as strict as him? What kind of what approaches they have? Because if we have them in the 20th century, 21st century, are they different from him? What do they do? And then when you Google Jean Calvin and some followers, so accidentally, by chance, I found Abraham Kuyper.
Okay.
I didn't know how great he is when I just discovered him. I became a big fan. And I was fascinated that he promoted this idea, and he was completely sure that with modernization doesn't lead to the decline of religion. It doesn't have to lead to that. So you can be politically advanced, economically advanced, very open-minded, but doesn't mean that you have to stop being religious. You can be truthful to your faith, and at the same time to be fully engaged, to be open to new ideas, to new perspectives, and to build something great. And then when I learned that he became a prime minister of the Netherlands, I was even more interested. What is this neo-Calvinism is, and what it brought to Holland? It was quite a fascinating trip for me. And then I started discovering where these communities are located. And Canadian Reform community has its uniqueness because they moved from the Netherlands after World War II, and then because they were partially isolated, so they preserve this identity, Calvinist identity or neo-Calvinist identity, as other Dutch Reformed communities which came here. So I was very curious about neo-Calvinism itself, but because it was much more sense for me to be in Canada to study neo-Calvinism than to be in Holland.
Yeah, because neo-Calvinism kind of plays out in North America and in Canada and America much more.
Yes,
because it seems to have died a little bit in
exactly, and it was preserved here, and it was fantastic. So they transfer those ideas of Abraham Kuyper to Canada, and they preserve them here. And they still use them. So you know that ARPA was recreated and became so consolidated and strong from 2007, and there is portrait of Abraham Kuyper there. So we talk about these ideas living today.
Follow the rabbit hole, and then she brings you right to Ottawa, I guess. That's cool.
And then when I came to Canada, just when I was doing my master's degree, and I started to do it about neo-Calvinism in Canada and to learn about this, of course, I had some limitations in terms of finding the literature. So I was ordering some books by Amazon by Amazon to Russia. But again, it's not many books are there. Many of the studies, they've never been published. They're, for example, master's degrees or PhD degrees, and they're only kept in the libraries of community, of the community.
I don't think anyone would be able to tell you where they went. Like anyone in our community hasn't gone and read those things. So I'm amazed that you came and found these.
You need to go to some archives. You need to meet people. So I came to the theological conference in Burlington.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It was very hard. My English wasn't good enough. It was quite hard to understand what was happening, but it was the chance to meet people and to learn about the community. They were incredibly welcoming. But again, I think we discussed it before. Welcoming to the extent that they respect your choice to study the community, that they're interested why you're interested in their community, but they don't try to pull you directly into the community, try to make you a member of the community. Of course, they would be glad if more people join the community. I think they're pretty selective in the sense maybe like good people should join the community.
Yeah, faithful, I would say.
Yes.
Like there's quite a process in terms of becoming a member.
So, but it was, then I came to Ottawa, the Ottawa Church, Jubilee Church, to be present at the service and Canadian Reformed Church. And then I met Andre Schuten.
Okay, yeah.
And he was incredibly welcoming, and he gave me his card. He told, look, we have this organization. Maybe you're interested. Like, yeah, I'll do search. So I came back to Russia, and then I opened the website of ARPA, and I was shocked about all these initiatives and all the stuff they promote and lobby, and how much success they have as well. You know, it's a small group of people, but they're incredibly vocal in the public sphere and the public arena of Canada.
Definitely.
And they defend not only Reformed communities, but they also sometimes support some other. For example, in the case of the Loyola Catholic school, they supported the Catholic school. And they felt that they need to do it because they have this expertise, legal expertise, so they can be one of the interveners during the court process. And they wrote the motion. And actually, Loyola School didn't pay for this court case, so it was covered by legal side. And so I know that ARPA also contributed to this legal side, again, coming from the idea that for the schools, they need to teach the students. And for ARPA, they take the political and legal side of the work. This is the division between the spheres. Every sphere has their own, every domain has their own tasks. And the tasks are to follow the God's mission, to bring the God to every sphere, but do your own responsibilities.
Yes.
So this is why Carver was against, for example, the national church. So
because it's over too many spheres.
Yes. So the God stays over all spheres. So church is just one of the spheres. Church doesn't stay above other spheres. So
that's really cool. Yeah. So like that's really fascinating how you ended up getting here to study this. So getting back to the methodology, I guess I'm just curious why the educational aspect of it, and why not study the community as a whole, the church and the politics and all that.
Because it would be very broad. I think it would be very broad. And even choosing one institution, I still had to study different aspects of the community.
Yeah, clearly you got a good understanding of the community. So
thank you. I hope so.
We were reading through, and I was like,
away.
wow, that's amazed you. We're more
true.
here.
That's true. Yeah, that rings. That's accurate. Yeah.
So I guess that's what comes to talk about from talking to 64 people. But yeah. Why the schools is the schools, like obviously that's kind of where like the youth get trained and I guess that's kind of where we can teach and maintain that Calvinist and that covenant community and way of thinking. But is that kind of like why you chose the education in particular?
Actually, it's a good question because I was struggling for a while thinking what exactly I want to study about this community. I knew for sure I want to study this community because it wasn't given enough scrupulous attention from the scholarly point of view.
Sure. Oh, I thought it was the other way. That you thought about education and then you decided, oh, this is a decent group to study.
No.
It just hasn't been done. It's groundbreaking stuff.
I knew exactly I want to study this community because the community itself is a very interesting case study, talking about other immigrant communities long-standing. And since there are not many scholarly studies, secular studies, academic studies about this community, I thought it can be a very interesting way to start this process. And I hope that there will be other studies about the community, maybe other institutions as well. So many things are written about Christian Reformed Church, but not much about Canadian Reformed.
Right.
And then looking at the community, I thought I wanted to study what is the evolution of the community. You need to choose one of the institutions.
Sure.
And I thought the school can be a very interesting one because it's a long-standing institution. And also it's an agent, it's a social agent which can be actually impacted, for example, by the government. And by the society as well.
Right.
So when you have church, you have your theology, you have your doctrines. Nobody can come to your church and tell that you cannot do. You cannot. They're not good ones. They're not right ones. They're not politically correct ones. You cannot do that in your church unless there is cases of abuse.
Right.
And something like that. Then no, nobody will touch the church. What parents do with their children at home? Nobody knows. There are no complaints. Nobody knows. Nobody comes to parents because parents still have a lot of rights in the country. But when we talk about schools, this is the tricky moment.
Yep.
And it's a question to which extent the government has to be involved in the school, to which extent the government has a right to be involved in the school. And there are so many sociological, philosophical discussions and theological ones as well about the existence of religious schools, what they bring to the table. Do they actually contribute to the public good of the society, having the schools, or they shouldn't exist at all?
Right.
So there are two extremes. Those who tell that we should have religious schools and there should be no question. Every religious group has a right for their religious school. How sustainable it is, it's a question. And who will pay for this is also a question.
Yeah, right.
Does the community have the money? Do they have money from the government? And so on. There are other extremes. It's a more liberal approach who would say that this is damaging for the people, for the students. This is damaging for the children. They're not exposed to diversity. They're not exposed to diverse perspectives. They don't sit at the same table with people from different religious groups and secular people. They need to be torn, and this turning happening. If your parents tell one thing and you hear an opposite thing at the school, you can be very, very confused. But they tell that this confusion is necessary for the future benefit of this kid. And the kid, as a citizen of the country, has a right to get a proper education and to be exposed to all these theories and all the diversity of perspectives. The majority of the scholars, they would be in the middle, as usually, in the middle, telling that there are both benefits and shortcomings of religious schools, depending on religious schools, depending on the community. And we can see, and I thought that it's very interesting to see the evolution of these 40 years of schooling, Canadian reform schooling in Ontario. And the evolution can show that any school or many religious schools, they would evolve, they would change, they would be more open to the outside society.
Right.
They would respond to the outside society. And this can break down some stereotypes and some fears which many people in the society they have about newly emerged religious schools. What will happen to them? Why they're so isolated? What are they doing there? We need to close them right now before they do something bad. But this is the first stage of religious schooling. This is how they start. This is the first generation. They just, the schools are just new in the public sphere. Just give them time, give them several decades and you can see what's there. So those kind of studies about the long-time schooling, I believe it can benefit to this further sociological research to understand better other religious communities, especially newly emerged.
Yeah. So would you say if someone from outside our circles were to read your paper, maybe this kind of gets into, we can get to the conclusions, I suppose, but your paper is hopefully going to help them understand, like, here's what this community is about. Here's what their schools do. And here's why, like, you should not have concerns. These people, they do a good job. They educate their kids. They're not some crazy religious wackos.
You're just telling what the conclusion is.
But like that's kind of that was the impression I got. But maybe like
I'm gonna say ARPA's gonna end up citing you in a court case sometime when the government says, well, you know what, we should shut these schools down. They're gonna say, well, Mariia said, and here it is.
Exactly.
I mean, but that gives you a good reason why this research is so valuable, and you know why we're so excited to have you. So
maybe I stole your thunder, but if we could talk about some of the conclusions and get into that.
No, I think it's a good point, and this was one of the hardest part of my research and my writing the thesis, because I always kept in mind two groups of people who might read and I hopefully will read the thesis. There are two target groups which are a little bit too different. So of course there is a community, and I hope it would be more even not only for Canadian Reform community, but for other Reform communities and maybe other Christian communities who have their schools. Especially private schools, because we talk about Ontario. And also I thought about, of course, it's an academic paper. It will be read by people in academia, and I hope that there will be more studies about religious schooling. Right. So they were not building stereotypes about very traditional Christian schools. No, what is it, like small traditional Christian community? There is already something. We need to be very careful. There are some stereotypes around that. And when you look at mass media, Canadian mass media, national one or even local, you can see how very often Dutch Reform communities, there is not much understanding like who are those people. And there are many different Dutch Reform communities. And I did some comparative study about how Dutch Reform people presented, for example, mass media and in Reformed media. And you can see that in mass media, they're they're well presented as very hardworking people. Of course, very often being mentioned about related to World War II. Veterans being interviewed every year. And in Hamilton, there would be more about their missionary work and helping also homeless people and so on. But there are also a lot of generalization. For example, now there are so many studies talking about there are many generalizations of the Muslim communities, but there are also many generalizations of the Dutch Reform communities. They just put all together, and I was very upset about that because I spent a lot of trying to figure out all the structure of Dutch churches in Holland, then how they moved here, what they built here, what they stand for. And when you look at mass media, and you see just the Dutch Reformed, and one newspaper wrote that there are two groups of people. They're Christian Reformed and Reformed. Yeah. And like, what?
Yeah, right. You can't break it down.
Yes. There are many more about that. Thinking about this academia, you want to present them very clearly. And so it would be very well understood who are they, what they stand for. So it's a church with a long history. You can look that it was created in 1950, but this is not what theology goes back to the 16th century, to Calvinism, and then you go through all these changes in Dutch theology and so on. So it's a long history. And for me, it was so important. I tried to touch on very hot topics, for example, sex education in my thesis. But talking about this topic all the time when I was writing, I was thinking whether I'm truthful to myself as a sociologist. Do I unveil all my findings, or I try to hide some findings? So I wanted to put everything on the table, not to present the community only as a very, very good ones with no shortcomings. Everything just goes smoothly, because I wouldn't be true to the research. For the point of doing research, if you lie in your findings, for sure, you want to put the truth. But at the same time, you always need to keep in mind, talking about traditional community, traditional religious community, how it will be read by a person who has no idea about traditional Christianity. What kind of ideas they might have in their mind about those.
Yeah, that's a hard line to walk.
Yes, especially if you didn't study religious communities, if you don't know much about Dutch immigrants or Reformed people, and then you look at mass media, so can be very misleading. So I had to add much more information that I would do if, for example, writing just for Canadian Reformed Church, because everybody knows what is there.
Right.
And why you have this particular approach. I need to compare the approaches, for example, to sex education to other religious communities outside Christian spectrum.
Okay. Yeah.
So why they look at this? For example, take sex education. So Muslim communities, they would have very similar approach to sex education in the sense that they want to have it in the school. Nobody says that you shouldn't have it. Yep. But it's about what kind of values stand behind this education. What is the message being used to teach this education, and at which grade? So it's very similar. And I try to put it to compare to different religious groups, not just to this is what Christians think. Right. Then also talking about, again, I think sex education was one of the hardest part of the thesis. Sure. Comparing, okay, this is these in Canada, Reform communities. Let's look at other Christian communities. Let's look at Catholic Church, or let's look at the Eastern Orthodox Church. They had a very similar approach. So it's not just this one community. So I wanted to make sure that this research is not being read that this community has a very narrow-minded approach to this particular topic. No, it's not only about them. Look at other religious communities. They have very similar approach. And this is and I had to refer to scripture sometimes just because I need to explain why they stand for that.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was even this study is about the schools is much more broader because you need to explain a lot of things. When I go to the conference and when I present my study, I need to give a lot of context. You cannot just jump into the schooling system without talking about who are those people, when they came to the country, why they have those institutes. Then you need to explain that I'm not Dutch because I speak with an accent. People think that I look Dutch enough.
Yeah,
so there are a lot of context. So half of the conversation is about who are those Dutch people, why I'm not Dutch, why I'm also with them.
Yeah, Russians are the new Dutch people. Yeah.
That's funny.
And then jumping into that. So this was one of the challenges.
Yeah.
And talking about it's a good topic about methodology and whom I interviewed.
Yeah. Okay.
So I went to several conferences, like theological ones at Burlington. I attended several conferences created by ARPA, God and Governance, and for the youth. Yep. Some events. So I tried to kind of recruit people for interviews there to meet people. And there was a lot of snowballing, so they would recommend others and others. I was trying to have a specific portrait of the people who can be interviewed. I wanted to have a very diverse socioeconomic representation of the community, just to make sure that even when I interview all of this diversity of people, the results would be similar to the extent that this is the average vision. This is, this is what's happening there. And that to reach the saturation point when there is just a repetition of the same ideas, a repetition of the same thoughts or stories. That's why I had to do the 64 interviews until I reached the saturation point, because the more people I interviewed, the more things I learned, the more different things I learned. So this is not the point when I need to stop.
Yeah, the bigger it gets.
Yes, and to discover more and more and more things. And I thought that focusing on schooling system. So of course I interviewed graduates of the schools of different decades, from the 80s until 2010s.
And how long have you been doing this study?
So I started the study. If roll back to my master's degree in Russia, it would be 2013.
Oh, wow.
When I started studying the community. So it's more basically about Abraham Kuyper and just understanding the historical background of the community. And then I started my thesis in 2014. But, it's a long process when you prepare your proposal and you develop the literature review. So yes, so it's the 7th year of my research.
Wow, 7 years, yeah. Well, that's a good number to be on for your thesis. Number of fullness. Yeah, so it's quite a long time. And I thought that when the graduates of this all 4 decades, and when I talk about them, it's in decades. So in the thesis, it's reflected. This is the graduate of this decade. It's never a year because the community is so
to keep that anonymity.
It's tough.
It's very hard. So I need to work actually on anonymity. What is that? Except I haven't just a number for the interviews, but also I need to hide the decade, the year when they graduated. Because it's very easy. You have two high schools in Ontario. It's very easy to figure out who is
when I read through that methodology and specifically the anonymity part of it, I was so surprised at the lengths, and I was like, I guess you'd have to take that measure to make sure, because it's so interconnected.
So small.
It's very small.
It's very interconnected. And then when I reread my thesis, I realized that actually if you put some quotes together, there will be some narrative. And from this narrative, you can actually figure out who the person is. So actually several people have several numbers.
Right. Just to confuse it. Yeah. That's smart though.
So you cannot. And for example, not always I would say the principal, I would say teacher, because the principal can be teacher as well. If you say the principal, okay, you have 15 schools. Now we'll figure out who this person who betrayed the community.
A wolf in sheep's clothing.
And I felt that was incredibly important in terms of confidentiality, because there was even one person who I came to the event and he came to me and he asked, I heard you're doing this study. I said, yes. And he was just for a day in the city. So I want to be interviewed. So it was the only one time when the person asked for being interviewed. Usually me going up to people, looking for those who want to contribute their time. So okay. So we met, I think, at 8 a.m. in the morning for the interview because he had a train.
Sure.
And he wanted to share something which he tried to share with the community for a while, but he wasn't heard.
Okay.
Or wasn't heard enough. So he wanted this to be in the study. And again, this is not what the community presents. This is what one of the members of the community shared this, for example, anecdote of this story. It's not defining it. This is not the conclusion about the community.
Sure.
It's just one person, but it was important for him to be heard. And there are several people who shared that they, in the family, some people are more progressive. They incline to some more progressive ideas, like in the framework of Canadian Reformed Church, but still, some are more conservative. And it's not always when spouses feel comfortable actually to share where they're inclined.
Right, interesting,
and they share this for the research. For the person who's outside of the community, for me, it's fine if they're more progressive or they're more And they felt the value that they wanted to be heard because they didn't feel comfortable to share within such a small community. And for people, it's so important to have this. They actually afraid to be to leave the community or to be asked to leave the community. So sometimes they're afraid to speak out about certain issues or certain aspects they want to improve. So I cannot I cannot say that there were many issues and many red flags, and this is like something bad happening. There wasn't like that. There was some certain aspects, for example, how people want to have more inclusive sexual education, how they want to have the school more comprehensive sexual education, and more inclusive schools, and more perspectives being presented, something
Diversity,
something like that. And to have this diversity of perspectives, you cannot just interview people who are members of the church. You want to interview people who are experts in this topic, but not only who are right now members of the church. Right. So I found some people who left the church, and mainly because of the question of their gender identity, and they couldn't be part of the church. So they left the school, and many of them, they actually graduated the school, but they just left the church after. So they're former members of the community, but they still went through the school system.
Right.
And for me, it was fascinating actually to hear that neither of them said anything said much bad about the school. So their presentation of the schooling system was very nuanced. So they didn't tell this is bad, everything is bad. Yes, they couldn't be part of the community anymore.
Right.
But they saw the value of the community, and they saw the value of the schooling system as well.
Yep.
They, for example, some of them, they left the community, but they still felt this Calvinist spirit in them. They tell, I have this hard working ethic and I know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And they tell that I write really very well in English. I know because academically the school was incredibly strong.
Yes.
And we're talking about the school from the last 20 years, not the first 20 years, but mainly the last 10, 20 years, became very, very strong academically. So, and actually talking to former members of the community who left the church, who have some maybe tensions also with the current members of the church, but they tell very positively about the schooling system. So it says something about the schooling system itself.
Yeah.
You cannot change the theology the schooling system is based on, but you can change the approaches, how the teachers are open to share different perspectives, how they're open to raise some complex questions and address them in the classroom.
Right.
So this was former members. And also talking about the sense of the community, the fact that there are some blogs of former Christians, but also there are blogs of former members of Canadian Reformed Church. So people leave the church, they disagree with this, they don't want to be part of that, but they miss this feeling of this community. Right. They cannot replace it by another Christian community they would agree more with.
Right.
So there is something very special about the Canadian Reformed Church and Canadian Reformed community. It's partially isolated. It's kind of a little bit greenhouse, but it gives you some feelings of permanent support, and you know everybody. Like it's a true community.
Yeah. I want to ask you about that actually, because on that idea of becoming more ethnically diverse and diversity of opinions as well, and that sort of thing too. There's an interesting quote actually from your study, so I'll just read it here and then get your response to it. It says, a strong identification with Canada as a homeland was also one of the reasons why the Federation of Canadian Reformed Churches does not have a reference to Dutch descent in its title. Moreover, since the start in 1950, the CanRC has promoted the idea of an inclusive and ethnically diverse church. In practice, it has stayed ethnically homogenous. So that's a very interesting statement right there. So, and that kind of, at least personally, that rings true to me as well. I've never found it to be in talking to some people from different backgrounds in our churches. Their experiences, it's not like it isn't unwelcome, or it's not like it is
not an
unwelcoming.
Exclusive thing. Yeah,
it just happens to be. It just kind of as a natural progression. Like I would say, we're slowly diversifying in terms of different ethnicities, and probably diversity of opinion as well, as reflected by platforms like this springing up, and more people living in different areas and different opinions being shared, also with the advent of social media and blogs and that sort of thing too. But yeah, maybe explain why you wrote that and why you came to that kind of conclusion.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And this is actually when I came to the study. So I was reading a lot about Dutch immigration, and I was sure that Dutch ethnicity will be a big part of my research, and I will ask everybody about their Dutch roots, and everybody will talk about Dutch food and Dutch theology, and this is like will be half of the conversation. Yeah, this is what I was coming from, and this is what people outside the community think. They still name the community Dutch.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
Yes, and it's not only what I read in the books. I was at the university. I talked to one of the professor, and I mentioned that I'm studying some schools. One of them in Fergus. They're like, "Oh, I know those Dutch people." Yes. So it's still still there, but the community don't associate themselves with Dutch. So Dutch ethnicity is not the key identity they have. The key identity is to be reformed Christian person. So what happened is when they moved here, they created the church, and in the church, the community promotes the idea that you need to be to have a spouse. If you have a spouse, so the spouse should be on the same theological ground as you. So you need to share all the aspects of theology. How you do it? You would just find a spouse in the church, not only in the church, in schools as well. You have all these institutions. You can from cradle to grave, you can spend all your time in your community. It can be perfect. So this what leads to the situation that you still have Dutch names. All pastors have Dutch names. Then you come to Guido the Brass School. You look at the graduates of the schools. They are all white with Dutch names. Some such names, they repeat each other because it's their families.
Teachers like, oh, we've seen this guy before.
This is what happens. But it happened not because the community wanted to preserve their ethnicity. It wasn't the priority. And the fact that they immigrated here and they tried to assimilate as soon as possible in terms of integration in the society, economical ones. So they learned the English so quickly. They switched the services into English language, which was very unique, and they were integrated. The individuals, on the individual level, people also wanted to speak only English at home. So they might have spoken Dutch between the spouses, the first generation of immigrants, but they spoke only English to their children.
Right.
And this shows that was the idea to become Canadian. You can ask current members of the community, how they identify themselves with the nationality speaking. They would never say Dutch. They would say, I'm Canadian.
Yeah.
And then was about, your Dutch name and so on. Okay, so I can say I'm a Canadian with Dutch roots. Yes, we have Dutch roots. But it's not something that comes first in mind.
Yeah. Right.
And there is a lot about symbolic ethnicity. But people, of course, then you remember, okay, I have my Dutch name. You cannot forget that you have some Dutch roots. You see your name every day. And you see other people with Dutch name. Then you can dig deeply and to see that people still read Dutch books to their children, but again, only at home. It's not that schools would refer to Dutch history. There is not much Dutchness in the schools, but there is Dutchness still there in the air, in the sense that the theology, you refer to Dutch theology. People like eating
Droppies? Those like, little licorices?
Yeah, oliebollen.
Yes. See, and besides that, like there's
just a few
food, a few of the little things of food and stuff. But if you asked, like, if you asked what the Netherlands is like I would have no idea. Like, right, but I would identify as we're Dutch. But I wouldn't be able to tell you the first thing about Holland. Like, I don't know. I don't know what it was like 4 generations ago, and what my grandparents and great grandparents, like, what that was like.
Well, but if someone stopped you on the street and asked where you're from, you're like, oh, like, I'm Canadian or something. Yeah, like if you're traveling
Dutch
abroad.
Canadian, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Dutch. I would just say Canadian.
You would say Canadian, but then when pushed like into a box like in the church or whatever, you're like, I'm a Dutch Canadian, whatever.
Yeah, but that
was just interesting. Yeah,
it's true, and people actually see that the Netherlands moved so far away from the original Reformed tradition, so they don't want to go back, and there was no ever question to go back. It was always a ticket one way. When Dutch immigrants were coming here, they were sure that this is for their best. This is their mission to make Canada better and make it Christian, much more Christian nation. And the Dutchness is more, again, on this symbolic level. What you eat, sometimes how the house of your grandparents might be decorated. There are exchange programs with Holland. But I see there is more vision that people are too different. And there were some cases in schools when there were exchange students coming from Holland and they sang some songs that they thought appropriate, but they're completely inappropriate for Canadian Reformed schools. So there were, and students also can see what are those Reformed. So when you have exchange, you also need to make sure that you learn something good from those those new Dutch people. Yeah. So this old Dutchness, it's very different again because the community moved here. It was a consolidated religious identity here, and the community was homogeneous. There was such a high level of endogamy, which helped them to preserve their ethnicity. And usually the studies, some studies say that the stronger the religious identities, the less the ethnic identity is a priority.
Right.
So it goes on the background. This is not the key, but just because how the community isolated and preserved itself in terms of religion, Dutchness was there because they were from Holland originally.
Right. Sure. So are there other groups that you came across that were similar in that they isolated like the Canadian Reformed Church did, or is it that most groups like the CRC or the Christian Reformed group that they kind of integrated a little bit more?
Maybe compare those two, because I'm curious, because their school system is a lot different than ours, obviously.
Yeah. So of course, if you're talking about interdenominational Christian Reformed Church schools, so this will be a very transformative approach, and so they would integrate more. They would be having more different Christian people of different Christian denominations in their schools as teachers, as students, especially. But they still have the Dutchness there too.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's still there. So I think it's changing. So I'm not a big expert in Christian Reformed Church, just in some aspects. But back several years, like in 1980, there was an article in the Christian Reformed magazine saying that it's time to burn and wooden shoes. It's time to move from Dutchness.
That's radical.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
This was that time. I think they changed over the years because they do a lot of missionary work. They have more and more different people in their church.
Yeah.
So they got rid of the Dutchness because this was the motto of 1980. So they moved.
So it was a very intentional decision to do away with that. Eh?
Yes, it was very, very intentional.
Yeah. So like I think what the intention is a little bit growing in the Canadian Reformed circle, but it's not that it's like everyone was on board with dispensing of heritage. Like I don't think we see the need to just do away with it.
To your point, because I don't think most people see it as super fundamental. Like perhaps I would be third generation, I guess. But like my grandparents would definitely consider themselves like Dutch Canadian, if not Dutch fully. But like that's as generations go on, that just changes. So
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people our parents' age who still speak a bunch of Dutch, or like we're still like
I couldn't tell you like a Dutch.
No, exactly right. So, but no, I think that's a great point. That as your heritage, your physical, I guess your country of origin, that just kind of like fades away as your religious convictions are kind of driving the community. So,
but at the same time, some people talked about when I put them like. To the corner and then talk about your Dutchness. Push the corner. You need to talk about Dutchness because for me it was important. I'm writing a section about Dutchness. You need to talk about your Dutchness. Yeah. Actually, and when you ask them like what about Dutchness, some of them said that they think that it's actually a shortcoming of the community because it's seen from outside also as too Dutch. People come to the church, it's too Dutch. Nobody speaks Dutch, or you talk about the Netherlands or something like Dutch, but still they feel that it's very homogeneous. So for others, it's hard to be engaged in this, hard to be part of them. Right. And so we can see on the level of the third and fourth generation of people, some of them they move to other Christian churches. Some Reformed churches, some different ones. So one of the reasons is because they find it's too homogeneous, and it's very hard. For example, if they found a spouse from another church, they move to that church of their spouse, which they feel more inclusive, rather than this church.
Right.
And I think they might be mistaken telling that this is because of the Dutchness. I think it's this. The mentality of the community itself is incredibly homogeneous. It's not about the ethnic identity. It's about that if you grow up with the same people, you go to the same school, you live in the same neighborhood all the time, hanging out with the same people. It's hard to make somebody included into this.
Right.
It's very interconnected.
Yes.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that that's not really a Dutch thing so much as it is like the traditions that kind of grew out of that is now something that we associate with our church specifically, or our community specifically, like that, like the way we even go about doing church, like, I mean, you went to a Canadian Reformed service, like it's different than say you go to a different service. So is that aspect of like the tradition, like, is that more tied to the religious tradition, or is it more tied to like the Dutch?
Some of the tradition, there is something that a little bit Dutch. For example, having two services per Sunday.
Sure.
This is a Dutch tradition. For example, reading Bible during at the
Mealtime?
mealtime.
Is that a Dutch thing?
Yeah, so it's coming from the 17th century. It was coming from Dutch Reform.
Oh, it's not like broadly Protestant or anything? Like
no, but this was for at least for Dutch Reform, it was very, very common.
Oh, interesting.
Not for all Protestant tradition is common. Maybe some people do it, some other communities do it, but for Dutch people, yes, it was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
At least like what I read in like historical books about what this is Dutch is reformed. So it's still there, but this is not the key. And just talking about coming back maybe to the methodology to those people who were involved.
Yeah.
Many of them were Dutch with Dutch names.
Yeah.
Again, they were former members of the community. They were current members of the community. I didn't interview any pastors because it wasn't. No, I did some.
Yeah, you'll be able to tell by their number that they were Dutch.
No, there were some pastors, but not only from Canadian Reformed Church, from other churches as well, just to see perspective. And I think that this is also shows that community sometimes is very self-isolated in the sense that many other Reformed communities don't know what Canadian Reformed people do in their schools, what Canadian Reformed people do in their churches.
Yeah.
For example, people from Christian Reformed Church would say, we know why those folks have their school system, because they wanted to isolate. They think that they're the best ones. They still think so.
Yeah, there's a bit of a stereotype there.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So this is what they always paint us as as bad ones, and they're good ones. And then I shared with them, by the way, this is what my findings. And they were so surprised how the schooling system has changed in the Canadian Reformed community, but they have never heard about that. I always find it's very funny why it's me who is not Reformed telling to Christian Reformed Church, telling about other Dutch Reformed people what they do in the community while you live in the same area. Yeah. I think there is a lot of there is not much connection between the communities and a lot of like all the stereotypes, something like habits which have been living through the generation and some stereotypes and ideas.
Yeah, there's kind of a live and let live approach in terms of like the CanRC and the CRC. Like we both know we're different. Yeah. Everyone knows what the differences are. They're more of a liberal church, you might say, and then we're more of on the conservative or, the argument would be more scripturally sound at the CanRC view. But we kind of just leave each other alone and there's not really much cross-pollination there.
Yeah, like historically we've just been like separated. So yeah, no, but I'm excited so that your paper can come out and then, like an outsider's perspective is like you have a lot of credibility because you don't have there's no reason for you to come to a conclusion. So you come to a conclusion that you come to because of the research. So
it seems like on the one hand, like the strength of our community is that like the homogeneity provides a sense of like a comforting and kind of a warm community sense, which people you like if you're inside. But if you're growing up, you're like trying to find a spouse and sometimes you can feel claustrophobic or whatever, or if you're coming from the outside to get into it, it's kind of, there's a layer of just like a community knowledge that you kind of have to pick up over time too. Yeah. So that it's kind of simultaneously a strength and a weakness. Did you find other strengths and weaknesses, like kind of those sort of parallels in your study?
So I think this is one of the big ones when talking about the schooling system. If you just as others in the classroom, if you're good enough, bad enough, and you're not different from others, you don't have problems. You like your community, you have no problems with the peers. But if you have some slight differences, and if somebody make any assumptions about, for example, your gender identity, then you might be in trouble. Or if you really question your gender identity, then you can be again in trouble. What I heard about, for example, Guido Dobre, that they have the environment of caring. So actually the schooling evolves in the sense that they try to address and help to their students, whatever struggle they face with. And again, to question gender identity it's still questioning process. You need to get some guidance, you need to get some help. But when you're inside the community, such a small ones, it's not that easy to get help. To whom you go? This is your aunt, this is your cousin. There is not much confidentiality happening here. So they have a contact with Christian counseling, which is interdenominational Christian counseling, and they found it's very helpful because the students can talk about any issues, whatever they face or struggle with a Christian person, but not from their community, very small one, and they find it helpful. And I think that this is environment of caring for others. It's emerging recently. It's not something has been there because it hasn't been always the case when people will be empathetic to everything, which is not a norm.
Right.
And this is what some interviewees, the members of the community, they said that we'll want just to be, to do everything by rules, but we don't want to be ready for any situation when it's not, you don't follow the dogma, or you don't follow the rules, or you faced some challenges, or maybe you made a mistake. Every person makes mistakes, big ones mistakes or small ones mistakes. But how do you talk to a person, for example, who, I don't know, went through through abortion? If the school system tells this is wrong, but you don't address the issue if somebody goes through that, what do you do with adolescent pregnancy? You tell this is bad. What this girl in high school needs to do? Talk to whom? So today, for example, in one of the classes in Canadian Reform schools at religious studies, the students write a lot of essays, and they reflect on some questions. So I think this is how they develop critical thinking. It's incredibly important. Yeah. So one of the questions was about how do you talk to this person who went through abortion? And I think this is fantastic approach in the sense that you're prepared for the situations, for the challenging situations, rather than just live and think that everything will be great. Every community going through some struggles. Every family goes through struggles. You need to be ready for them. And I think this is this approach that they're taking.
Yeah, sure. That's super. Yeah, that's really interesting because we've been talking on the podcast about we're trying to work through a lot of these narratives and how do you approach certain topics and how do we deal with the things that are coming at us from the world, and then from a secular perspective, and then how do we interact with that, because we know that people in our community deal with it too. So it's I think that's good to hear anyway.
Yes, it's not always addressed. So there are some positive experiences when the teachers raise some questions and teachers ask students to bring some, for example, newspapers and to reflect on the current situations and how you would respond to the situation. To see this, for example, every newspaper has some political agenda. So to understand better what stays behind. But on certain aspects, it's not that evolved yet. For example, if somebody raises some complex questions in the classroom or some controversial questions, maybe the teachers would address the question if they're ready, if they're actually academically ready to address this very, very complex question, especially about current agenda and what's hot topics
sexual
in the society.
Politics, evolutionary.
They just don't know what to say in this in this aspects. And the students sometimes didn't feel comfortable to raise these topics because their peers would laugh at them and they would marginalize them. And for example, again, talking about queer people, queer identity, gender identity, the teacher wouldn't go into details and telling what exactly you can do from the biblical point of view, what you cannot do. So because the community recognizes that not everyone, that you might be born with, for example, with being a gay person, but you need to not to practice, not to have any relationships. And it's fine. So some churches, some communities within Canadian Reform community, they aware of that and they talk about it, while schooling system is not always ready to address those nuances.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously a struggle for a teacher, right? in a classroom setting, obviously. Yeah.
But not only in the Canadian Reform schools. If you look at the studies about other schools. Yeah. Teachers just try to stay away of any kind of hot topics.
Controversial topics. Even in public schools, I can imagine that it's.
Well, if you were to raise,
you don't want to be the guy who
you were to raise a Christian or a conservative point of view on a sexual topic like that, you would just as much get laughed at there for sure. I think. Tim, how are we doing on time? Are we?
I don't know about time anymore, but we had some issues.
All right. Well, we should probably we're getting close.
10 minutes. Maybe?
10 minutes left. Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's flying by.
Yeah.
Should we start from start?
Yeah. We'll go over
I'm curious, down to your thesis statement was about how to get or how well graduates integrate into the a pluralistic society after they're done schooling. So I'm curious about your findings there and what did you
going
come
forward?
across?
Yeah. What's your what do you think is going to happen for our community going forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, given all this, some shortcomings which has that community still self-isolated to some degree, and they still have some inward thinking, inward looking inside the community, volunteering just for the community, and so on. And see that not everyone is open to have dialogue with others. The schooling system, at least the schooling system, has evolved and changed drastically, and the community itself as well. So there is more outward looking. There are more perspectives being presented in the schools. For example, there are more. If it's not a curricular activity, it will be extracurricular activities. Yep. Some conferences talking about complex topics to prepare the students better. Also, we can see the diversification of the churches as well, in the sense that you have different churches with different approaches. So take, for example, the Blessings Church or Mercy Christian Church. We have the more evangelical approach, and Mercy Christian Church will target mainly unchurched people. Mm-hmm. So there is, you see that in the church system, there is more diversity, so people can find something different for themselves. Mm-hmm. So I strongly believe that this is how schools can actually survive and succeed. Then the community can find the right school for themselves.
Right.
Because when you look at the study, you look at some people look for strong academics, but they want also diversity of perspectives. Some other people in the community, some other parents want to have more traditional approaches, more traditional schooling system, more traditional teaching, and not to expose students to any, for example, too much sexual education, because they think that it will open this Pandora box, and there would be an assumptions that they have any premarital relations, so on. There is a lot of dichotomy in sense of rural and the urban area. This is a big thing for any country, for Canada, and for religious community itself. Yeah. And when you have schools run by parents, when the parents decide what to do with the curriculum, what the approach to take, and parents from rural area would have more traditional approach, parents from urban area will have different approach. What do we do in this situation? And it's very understandable. You compare, for example, Hamilton and Fergus. When in Hamilton, 1/5 of population are visible minorities, while in Fergus, only 3% of people are visible minorities.
Sure.
So you see, like, for whom it's a priority to have dialogue and to be exposed to more perspectives, maybe Hamilton, yes, they are more inclined to have that. Yeah. So I believe that the future of the schools can be successful if some issues being addressed, in the sense exposing people and preparing them better for their future life after graduation. Yeah. So that they don't have a split of identity when they go to college or university and they're being challenged about their identity. Yeah. They need to know why they're Canadian Reformed.
Yeah, to be able to take on the world and see, like, here is my identity as a Reformed Christian, but also there are a multitude of other perspectives and other issues, and to be able to deal with those in the high school. So am I hearing you correctly? So it'll kind of stay one high school, that's what you think? Or do you think it'll split? Like rural parents will make their own school and urban parents will make their own school.
I still it's already there. We have Fergus School and have Guido de Bray. So there are two high schools in two different areas. Yeah. So I think that maybe elementary schools also might take some similar approach to have more diversification.
Right.
I don't know, maybe other high schools will grow. So in Ottawa, we have only elementary school. We don't have a high school yet.
Yep.
So it might also look different. In terms of opening the school to other denominations, I don't think it will happen to very big extent, or at least not for the teachers. So maybe students will be will be there, but again will be selected from maybe Free Reformed Church, from United Reformed Church. What's happening? Yeah. More from closer churches, but not broadly speaking. It won't become interdenominational, especially given that 30-35% of the funding is given by not parents, but those who were parents before, or
just community donation.
Yes, it won't be there. So again, like, it's more outward looking and more perspective exposure. It's happening there. The more it will be there, it needs to be balanced.
Between the rural and the urban, conservative, liberal.
Yes, and the schools they're very fundamental for making people stay in the community, in the sense that it teaches the scripture very well. It's a very firm foundational studies. If you go to another Christian school, it will be the same. And I believe that for the community, it's incredibly important that it's students are surrounded by or taught by Canadian Reformed teachers. Mm-hmm. So is there the triangle is still there, even though 10% of students already in homeschooling in Canadian Reform.
Oh, is that the number, right?
So
Interesting.
it's growing, but schools need to show why they're still valuable.
Yeah.
They need to address the issues. And since it's already the third, fourth generation of students, they become more and more Canadian. They're exposed to more culture outside. You cannot select the books for the children anymore. You cannot put some filters on the movies because the pop culture is everywhere and internet is everywhere as well. So this changed the community enormously. The exposure to the outside world. And I think the fact that there are these extracurricular activities, the extracurricular conferences, when there is a conversation about pornography and transgender identity, this is what's happening. You just cannot ignore it.
No.
But I think it's a transformative step for the community. Accepting what's happening outside, being aware of what's happening outside, and addressing those issues. And seeing this huge evolution of the school system from being completely isolated, ignoring many aspects of the society, just focusing on something positive and trying to build the community, going very, very broadly, making diverse approaches and making diverse even churches.
Sure.
Like Blessings approach would be different from I don't know, Cornerstone Church. Schooling is also different. You have different curriculum, but they also try to standardize the curriculum. This is the goal of the League of the Canadian Reformed Schools Societies. They want to be aware of what the materials teachers use. So they try to make the academic level higher, and they want to make sure that in rural area and urban area they taught more or less based on the similar materials, in the sense that students will be exposed to the same ideas and taught properly to be better prepared for the secular world. Given that the majority of the students go to university and college, so you go to for secondary. So I have this is my findings, and I hope to continue studying. Actually, to be honest, on
Very
Canadian
cool.
Reformed. I have some other thoughts of what I couldn't include in the thesis because it's outside the schooling system.
Right.
But I think there are many topics.
That's gonna be awesome. I think it's going to be so well appreciated. I just reading through it. It seems like such a fair assessment, and hopefully everyone can hear that this is like, you could be part of our church and no one would have any.
No one blink twice. Yeah. It's
other than the name and the accent, it's you're pretty much there.
It's super cool just to see your perspective on our schools and then where they're going, and it seems like kind of a balance of diversifying the views without compromising on the fundamental values, and trying, like you said, trying to get the curriculum similar across the board, and to keep the foundations there, but also recognize, we live in a changing world. There's lots of different ideas out there, lots of different people moving in, especially in our country too, lots of immigrants. So to be able to engage with them and to have a healthy and vibrant church community going forward.
And you brought up a lot of strengths that, of our community that I just forgot about. Like things that you take for granted.
Yeah, that's probably true.
How we all interact and the things that we've, that have been built over the generations. Like, you just kind of, as a third or fourth generation Dutch Canadian, you just kind of forget about it. So,
honestly, it's hopeful. It's good to hear. And there's definitely differences within the community and how to take different approaches on education and church matters. But I think, if we can, not to sound too cliche, but, hold on to the foundations, but go forward in some unity and accept some different approaches. I think things look okay, honestly. Yeah. It's not terrible.
So, we're almost out of time, I guess. But
we could do this all day. It's so interesting.
Maybe we'll just throw it back to you for one more time. Like, is there anything else that you found that you haven't mentioned yet that you thought was interesting?
Final takeaway.
I mean, there's tons of stuff in here, but I think everyone, once they get this paper, like, we should, I might just make maybe should get Mike Hutton to record himself reading it. He's got a great voice. Sure. We'll just get it out and we'll record it so people can listen to it.
Yeah, and remove some pieces which are not very relevant.
That's critical. Take
parentheses, page 5, 6.
Chapter 5 was pretty critical. Okay, take that. Yeah.
I think one of the important, and I strongly believe this is a very important funding for academic society, for people outside the community, is that critical thinking skills are the key. And whatever we talk about, the community was very isolationist and so on, but they still, the teachers from the start of these schools, they try to develop critical thinking skills in their students. There are so many concerns that religious schools cannot do it, but it seems that they do. And I read a lot of Elmer Theis, and so he's a Christian philosopher in Canada. So he wrote that he wrote a lot about Christian education. So he mentioned that he's against indoctrination. He doesn't want students to be indoctrinated. This is not the point.
Yep.
Because the point that they actually understand their religious identity very well. They know scripture very well. They know exactly what the approach is and how they can use and apply their knowledge and their Christianity to real life, to life.
Yeah.
Because Christianity is not for the schooling system, is not for thought, is for living. Living this Christianity, they don't need to be indoctrinated. They need to be explained why they believe in that. So they need to have very, very clear idea who they are and why they stand for that. And even though some interviewees said that the community not always aware why they're standing for that and why we're doing that, but the fact itself that they raised this topic. And so many of them mentioned, we don't know why we are doing that. We need to have a clear idea why we have a schooling system, what the future of the schooling system. They read a lot of different Reformed magazines. They don't only read the ones mainly produced by Canadian Reformed Church. For example, many people read different journals and online portals by Cardos. They try to get a better fundamental understanding what they do, and they reflect on the schooling system. So people provided examples. They showed very clearly, very honestly, they know, they reflect. They know the experiences. They know what's good, what's bad about the schooling system. And the fact that nobody tried to present the school intentionally or non-intentionally as a only positive experience, it showed that they have strong critical thinking skills and they see what was bad, what was wrong, how it can be improved. And I think the challenge for the community, and just to conclude, the challenge for the community and for the schooling system can be kind of put it as one of the quotes of one of my interviewees who said that how should we change, for example, or which kind of curriculum should all schools have? Should we conform and should we agree with the biases which exist in the community, or should we challenge them? So I think that the future of the schooling system will depend on that, what you decide to do, to address the challenges that you face, but address them, to admit that there are some challenges and some shortcomings, or you just decide, okay, let's do it because this is out of habit, this is what I've been doing for decades, let's stay just with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, hopefully we can apply our critical thinking skills and get through it.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully we can help in that.
All right. Well, this has definitely been some real talk. So we'll catch you next time, folks.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. You can send us your feedback by emailing us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. You can find us on social media by looking for the handle Reformed Real Talk. You can find us online by going to realtalkpodcast.ca. We look forward to your feedback, as that's what helps us grow and improve as podcasters. Real Talk is produced by myself, Lucas Holfluer, Tyler Vanderwood, and Tim Van Woudenberg. The theme music was created by Calvin Hutton. The table and cabinet behind me were made by Ethan Vanderwood of Eureka Woods. And finally, this sign in the studio was made by Zebra Signs. That's it for now, folks. Catch you next time.